Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebelbroker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebelbroker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please do not hold that against me. Coming at you once again this week, folks, with some interesting news. This one is kind of a fundamental one. As you know, if you've listened to the show at all since I started it back in 2007, one of the key things that I like to review and keep you up to date on is property rights. What is the state of property rights? And that's obviously a moving target across the country. The different states, different municipalities have different rules relating to eminent domain, seizure of property, all these other types of things. And we've had issues right here in Morgan Hill in the past where, you know, the city wanted to seize property and give it to another private entity simply because once all that was said and done, the city would get higher taxes from the property. And what's really crazy is there have been court cases that have decided that that's an okay reason for governments to do that. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because you have to ask yourself at some point, when is it no longer your home, right? At what point does the property really not belong to you because you don't get to control what happens with that property? And it's always been a shocker to me how silently so many people accept this stuff. I mean, one of the few things that motivated me to go and protest anything was that decision by Morgan Hill, which ultimately got defeated. But it took an awful lot of people screaming and yelling downtown and creating a stink about it in order for that not to happen. Now, that's obviously a local thing. That's a Morgan Hill thing. That's for folks who live here. That's a conversation to have and to fight local government. What happens if it's a much bigger thing? That brings us to this week's topic, which is home equity theft. And it is what it sounds like it is. I know that a lot of folks are referring to that as a hyperbolic reference to what's happening here. But this is something that's happening in the Supreme Court right now. It's being fought by one of my favorite organizations, the Pacific Legal Foundation. I strongly suggest you check them out. I subscribe to their newsletter. They're out there getting it done all the time. They've done tons of different cases that have gotten argued in front of the Supreme Court that focus directly on your property rights. And they're based right here in California. If I'm not mistaken, they're in San Francisco. And frequently they will take on the Coastal Commission and all kinds of different organizations right here in California that are constantly trying to tell owners of property what they can and cannot do to an unreasonable degree. So I wanted to cover this. I'd love to get your feedback. I have a hard time. It stuns me that things like this have been going on so long, and it amazes me that something that seems so obviously on its face incorrect and unjust is happening all across the country in different areas. Particularly, it happens in Washington, D.C., in the case of what we'll be discussing here. And to me, the seat of the federal government, that this should be happening there, just blows me away. So let's get into it. Now, for those of you who don't know, in circumstances where you owe back taxes or anything to the state, they can mandate the sale of your property to take care of that indebtedness, right? What you may not realize that in many locations, let's say you, for whatever reason, own a home and you cannot get you can't make the payment, you can't pay whatever it is you owe, or let's say you're so disconnected from the usual communication methods, or let's say you're so bad about your mail, a long period of time goes by and you do not realize you owe X amount of dollars in property taxes, $1,000, $10,000. The number is really not relevant. But for whatever reason, the government has gotten to the point that they are going to liquidate your property in order to pay the debt you owe on your home. We've got some pretty annoying examples here that we're going to talk about in a minute. But you would assume that once your property has been sold, that whatever's left over, once the debt and penalties has been paid, that you get the rest of the money, right? It's your property. You're the one who went into debt for it. You paid interest on the mortgage. You paid for the upkeep of the property. So if your property gets sold out from under you, you must get the difference, right? Well, in plenty of jurisdictions, that's not the case. You could owe the government, the state, whatever, $1. And if they sell your property for $1 million, they keep the whole thing. And that is so fundamentally wrong. It stuns me that it has had to go to the Supreme Court. It amazes me that any local jurisdiction, any city, any county, any state, with a straight face could defend a policy like this. It just blows me away. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about what the current case is. I've been following it on Twitter. I've been following the Pacific Legal Foundation's coverage of this. I'm very encouraged by the route it is taking. But these kinds of things, it makes you realize that you really need to keep an eye on the folks in charge, because given any opportunity, they will take actions that are not in your best interests and clearly feed these other interests that feed the state taking your money for their own benefit, but then also creating sort of a crony capitalistic relationship with other entities to whom they will then give your property in cases like this. And it's a shocker. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, this is an article from The Hill. The headline is Home Equity Theft. Can the government take more than it's owed? And again, they'll discuss this, but this is a direct violation of constitutional stuff. This isn't subtle things, right? Our Constitution covers a very specific bunch of things, and this absolutely falls into unreasonable. It's unconscionable. So let's get into the details. The specific case we're going to talk about here is Tyler versus Hennepin County, a case that will be argued before the Supreme Court on April 26th. And of course, April 26th has already come and gone, and I've been following it since then. The case concerns Geraldine Tyler, a 94-year-old grandmother from Minnesota who lost her home to equity theft. And this isn't because someone stole her identity. This isn't because of anything criminal that isn't government criminality. This was the government that came in and did this. A scheme that allows local governments to take all the value of a home as payment for much smaller property tax debts. And you can see as I was going through here, trying to decide what were the juiciest bits to share with you with my highlighter, I ended up highlighting the vast majority of this article. So let's just go ahead and hit it here. Hennepin County officials seized Tyler's home over a $2,300 unpaid property taxes bill and $12,700 interest, penalties, and fees. Now, this was another conversation I'd love to have with you. In my mind, if you are over the age of retirement and you've been paying into social programs your whole life, and I'm sure we could figure out some sort of a bar, is it fair to continue to charge property taxes to those people? I personally I think property taxes need a complete revamp, right? And that's a nationwide thing. Obviously, every state does different property taxes. Every county has different levels of property taxes. But in my mind, the property tax system we're currently faced with is not only burdensome, but is basically unfair. And I would love to have conversations about how do we reform that. Where should, and the problem is that it puts the motivation from the state's perspective on constantly making sure that properties get turned over, right? Like here in the state of California, we have Prop 13 that to some degree limits property tax increases, but the big benefit comes from, my point is, I don't think that compensation to the state should be tied to things that potentially harm citizens. And I think this is one of them, right? Where property taxes, if they can do things to you that will ultimately result in property taxes going up, which has already been agreed by courts is a thing that's okay for governments to do. If it'll raise the taxes to that community, seizing your property, using eminent domain, that is all considered a reasonable reason to do those things, which shocks me to no end, because there's already a vested interest on the part of the state to screw you over in order to do these kinds of things. So a couple of things. One, how do you feel about property tax now? Do you think there should be a different way that the state makes money? For me, and this is just, I'm just throwing this out there, but in my mind, what I would like to see is a scenario where the government benefits in ways that are linked to you benefiting. right? So in other words, let's pretend that the only taxes that were levied by anybody were commerce taxes. So they would have to strike this balance. So your commerce tax can't be so burdensome that it reduces commerce. So it needs to be managed at a level that is not so painful. People will refrain from engaging in commerce. But it needs to be at a level that will encourage the widest, so that it's, in other words, instead of being a skimming tax plan, it needs to be a depth tax plan, meaning that you get the widest number of people willing to still participate despite the influence of your taxes, right? But when you link things like income to the state to stuff like this, you end up with bad outcomes. It's also property seizure, right? This is something that happens with police departments where, for very unreasonable reasons, they can potentially seize your property, and then they just get it and they sell it and they auction it off and they get to keep the money. So that gives a vested interest to law enforcement organizations to seize your property. Now, am I saying that all law enforcement agencies do this and they do it to a oppressive level? I'm not saying that's universal, but I am saying that is happening, and it's happening here in California in many cases. And it needs to stop. And there shouldn't even be any question, right? Way back. So back in the days of the 90s, I lived right near Sacramento for a long period of time. And it was interesting. An article came out where the state legislature was complaining they were not getting enough revenue. So what was their solution? They went to the highway patrol and told them to start enforcing laws more aggressively on the freeways. And that's not why those laws exist. None of those laws should exist to be some sort of bizarre Sheriff of Nottingham kind of thing to get money for the state. It should be those rules and laws should only exist because the statistics and the realities have proven that it saves lives or makes things safer. Again, that could be a whole other conversation. But the idea that you as a legislature say, you know what, you as the highway patrol need to go out and enforce more of these so that we get more money, to say it out loud to the point where it was in a news article in, I think it was the Sacramento Bee, is just ridiculous. But those are the folks we're dealing with, and it is absolutely horrible. So let's get in. I realize I've kind of gone off on the grass here a little bit, but this is one of those shows where if you're looking for shows like the old school shows, for those of you who've been listening since 2007, you know I spent an awful lot of angry time on the podcast discussing things I really, really hated. And this is one of the things I really, really hate. And I got to think a lot of you hate it too, but perhaps just sort of you nod your head, you drink that next sip of coffee and you move on with your day. But these are things that can affect any of us. So let's go ahead and continue. Now, dozens of states and Washington, D.C. allow home equity theft. That's right. We're back on track with home equity theft, another brand of theft. In these states, when a homeowner fails to pay or underpays their property taxes, local governments place a lien on the home. If the taxes remain unpaid, the government forecloses and takes absolute title to the home. In some of these states, local governments pad their budget with the stolen surplus. In others, local governments sell the lien to private investors just for the amount of the tax debt, allowing them to keep as profit the homeowner's equity. Can you think of another scenario more ripe for corruption than that? Right? So let's make sure we understand that scenario and let's use it with what we have just talked about. So this woman from Hennepin County, this grandma, owes what? 12, 13, 14, $15,000. And her home sold for $40,000. So what they're saying is, in a scenario like this where you would sell that property to a private individual, they'd sell it to them for $15,000. And instantly have all of this equity. Now, who do you think might get picked to be the buyer of that? Just let it bounce around in your head for a minute. Do you think it might be someone who knows someone who gets to decide who gets to buy something? Do you think it just goes out on the open market for bid? No. This is a absolute TARP, Maxine Waters bank bailout scenario where some banks get money and some don't, and it's based on who they know in Congress, right? Particularly if you're you're related to Maxine Waters and you also happen to run a bank, and then you magically get money to get bailed out back in 2009, 2010. Okay, Both local governments and private investors frequently make substantial profits from home equity theft. A recent study by PLF, Pacific Legal Foundation, found that from 2014 to 2021, local governments took at least 8,950 homes. Homeowners lost around $860 million and, on average, 86% of the value of their home. Where do you go from that? How is that a thing? That is so clearly theft that it just annoys the hell out of me. The most common victims of home equity theft, and this is the other part, right? So I suppose there could be some segment of the political world that says, well, you know, we're sticking it to the big guys, right? We're really taking those guys out. Well, number one, those guys don't get behind on their property taxes. But what ends up happening is the theft affects most harshly the elderly, the sick, the cognitively impaired, and the poor. So you are stealing from the most disadvantaged of us, the folks who are most in need of our concern and our compassion, and you are taking whatever they have, whatever could help facilitate their continued existence to thrive at whatever level they can thrive. You're taking away the thing that we all understand as a tool to accumulate at least some level of wealth in your life, comparatively speaking, right? Real estate is often seen as that. You buy one today, you sell it in 30 years, and you've got a lump of cash, right? And that's in some markets, that's insane. In some markets, like the one I live in, you bought 10 years ago, and you're now, if you sold it, you'd have $1 million cash in your pocket, right? That's what we're talking about here. Now, here's another one that just blows me away. Take the case of Yuri Rafeli, who lost everything because he mistakenly underpaid his taxes by a mere $8.41. $8.41. That's almost one mocha at Starbucks. It's a little less than 2 mochas at Starbucks. So it's a coffee, right? After taking and selling his home, Oakland County, Michigan, made nearly $24,500. Fortunately, the Michigan Supreme Court later struck down the state's home equity theft law. So, if anything brings into your head that we need to keep an eye on these people, it is this. Because this isn't new. This has been around for years and years and years. It has been allowed to exist. And people who tell us they're watching out for us, despite the fact there are specific provisions, in the Constitution against this, so that the unreasonable taking of stuff from you, it gets implemented and kept around for years where regular folks lose. Let's see. Now, governments that employ this practice sometimes argue that the people who lost their equity deserve it because they did not pay their property taxes. However, most of the homeowners with whom PLF has worked did not intentionally shirk their tax obligations, and the foreclosure process is so complex that many did not understand it. In fact, many people think the notices from the government telling them they may lose their home are a scam. Would you not think that? Does this not seem like such a crazy thing that there's no way it's a real government thing? Now, I've been involved in real estate long enough, over 30 years, that I would not put anything beyond what state or local governments would do if it somehow benefits that state or local government financially. But their initial thing that argued that who lost their equity deserve it because they did not pay their property taxes, nothing after that even matters, right? Whether it was an intentional shirk or not, it could have been someone yelling, "Screw you, I'm not paying my property taxes," and ultimately having to face this fact, even under those circumstances, even under the circumstances of the most belligerent jerk dirtbag, they don't deserve to have all of their money taken because they owe $8.41. Fine with the government taking the amount owed and a reasonable penalty. I'm not sure I would want to leave the government to determine what a reasonable penalty is. But regardless of whether it was an innocent mistake or not, does not matter at all. In my mind, if you disagree with me, comment below. You can, if you're listening to the podcast, you can go to the website at soldbyrobert.com to watch the show page and comment right there on the site, or you can go to YouTube where the video version is and comment there. But I'd love to get, am I the guy? Am I the asshole in this equation? Am I just not getting it? Is there some universe where the government doing this, it makes complete and total sense and it's absolutely reasonable? I don't think there is. I don't think it is under any circumstances ever, period, full stop. It just hurts me. It hurts me deeply. Sometimes local governments don't give sufficient notice. Some homeowners reported that their local governments didn't notify them or only notified them once. In any case, even if homeowners are properly notified and aware of the debt, that doesn't mean the government can take more than it's owed, which is what I completely agree with that. And also, again, we use a process here on the show, right? Frequently, we have conversations about things where sometimes it'll just be me sharing my opinion, but I am always about following the money. Because you will frequently find that when you do, those who benefit from something financially, or an organization that benefits from something financially, will do everything they can to minimize the windows of opportunity for people to resist the taking of that thing that has value. Now they go on to say here, and this is the juicy bits that I alluded to at the beginning. Didn't really allude to them. I kind of yelled them, I think, at the beginning of the show. Not only is home equity theft unfair, but it also violates the Constitution. Although property taxes must be paid, the Fifth Amendment prohibits the government from seizing private property without just compensation. That includes hard-earned equity in a home. Hopefully, the Supreme Court will end this unjust, unconstitutional practice. If it doesn't, state legislatures should follow the example of Montana, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, which all banned the practices legislatively. And if anything, if on your list of states that you might want to move to, that you might be willing to relocate to, if those states don't earn a space on that list just because of that reasonable move of removing this kind of theft from practices that happen in their state, I don't know what does, but what should earn them a place. People should pay their property tax debts, but the government shouldn't profit from their misfortune. Absolutely. So I realize I pretty much read almost this entire article. Again, if you would like to see it, I'm going to include a link to it in the show notes. And again, you'll be able to see that whether it's in YouTube or on soldbyrobert.com or the rebelbroker.com. So there'll definitely be a link to that. And here's sort of a mini update. This is from CBS News. Supreme Court sympathetic to homeowner in equity theft dispute. You can go up on YouTube and watch plenty of videos on this. But the response on the part of the justices was, oh, so sweet. Chef's kiss on that one. I was super pleased to see how this played out. And, this is like, this is one of those deals where I'm going to lose a huge chunk of you. I'm not really a sports guy. This is my sports. This is where if anybody is sitting down with their face painted colors and an adult beverage and a flag in one hand and they're screaming at something, this is the stuff that gets me going. The court is considering whether to allow local governments and sometimes private companies to keep profits when properties are seized for failure to pay taxes. And what's really amazing here is the mechanism you might in your head be imagining that allows private companies to do this is some surreptitious, crazy corporate thing. But no, it is simply businesses colluding with government to get their hands on this stuff. And if this does not also get you suddenly thinking about the practice of eminent domain and how hard it should be, how hard it used to be versus how much easier it is now, right? If anything, eminent domain laws have been made much easier to execute than they were in the past, particularly here in California. The only thing that tends to stop it here in California is popular uprising. Because Morgan Hill at least has tried it once. I think they dabbled in it again some years later, but the response was so quick and so vitriolic, I think that just died immediately. And I'm very happy to say that the mall that they wanted to get rid of, they wanted to use eminent domain to seize and sell to and turn around and immediately give it to a third party to develop it into a new thing. That strip mall's still here. I think that's awesome. The government should have nothing to say about, well, it's not pretty. Tough. Who the hell are you to tell me that the thing on my land needs to be pretty because you have decided that it's not pretty enough? It's just very annoying. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm a little extreme on this one, but anyway. The Supreme Court seemed receptive Wednesday at a 94-year-old woman's claim that a Minnesota county violated the Constitution by keeping a $25,000 profit when it sold her home in a tax foreclosure sale. And then they gave her rundown here again. I wanted to kind of hit some of a couple of the things here. Conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch wondered whether there are any limits to government power to seize property without handing back the surplus when someone is behind on taxes. He gave an example of a $1 million property on which the owner owes $5,000 in taxes. Along similar lines, Chief Justice John Roberts said that if local governments had such power, what's the point of the takings clause, which is a direct reference to the Constitution, right? The takings clause. The Constitution seemed to have a different idea in mind, he said. Conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh said it seemed very counterintuitive to interpret the Constitution in a way that disfavors property rights. Liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was among those who were skeptical that the ruling in favor of Tyler would have broad implications, questioning whether there would be a real big practical problem. I have a fundamental problem with that attitude. It doesn't need to be a real big practical problem. It needs to be a practical problem for an individual. And it's an individual that sets the standard for what should be applied to everyone that comes after. And the fact that there's a chief justice that wants to poo-poo this because it's not real big practical is bizarre to me. Because the bottom line is, at 94 years old, this woman, how much longer could she potentially support herself with that $25,000? Any idea? Because she obviously doesn't have a place to live, right? Because her home's been sold. The idea that the level of compassion among some justices is so low that that's the bar. The bar needs to be, quote, real big practical problems. I'm sorry. That's dumb. And I don't understand why you think that is a bar that needs to be reached for the right level of concern here. Maybe I need a law degree in order to have that much of my soul sucked out. But for me, that's not the way to go. All right. The case is the last oral argument of the Supreme Court's term, which runs from October to June. By the end of June, the justices will focus on issuing rulings in the cases they have heard arguments in. They include some potential blockbusters about affirmative action in college admissions, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. 6 states, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Montana, Nebraska, and New Jersey, allow private investors to retain equity in properties once delinquent taxes are paid, the foundation says. Others allow the government to pocket the remaining equity when properties are sold. Let's see. That's not useful. Let's see. The state says under Minnesota law, it provides ample opportunity for property owners to protect their interests before properties are seized. Does that matter? In your mind, again, comment below or call me. Hell, give me a phone call. I'd definitely over a adult beverage chat with you on the phone on this one. Does that matter? Does it matter whether or not property owners are given ample opportunity? No, it doesn't. In fact, not only should that be the minimum bar to be given ample opportunity, but then once you do have to execute the sale, you take what you're owed. You don't take more than that. That doesn't give me a point that is pro keep the entire proceeds of the property sale. Tyler is arguing that the Constitution required the state to serve as her real estate agent, sell the property on her behalf, and write a check for the difference between the tax debt and the fair market value, the state's lawyers said in court papers. So let's continue with that analogy. Let's say the state does say, all right, because we had to do this, we acted as your real estate agent. Well, what is nationally the average commission for a real estate agent? 6%, 5%? In that particular scenario, they sure are getting paid more than 6%, aren't they? So even if we take their argument, let's say we accept their argument that they've had to act as a real estate agent, which is a stupid one, but let's go with it, right? Let's let that assumption move to the next level. The maximum that we would expect them to keep to compensate them for their real estate services, the fiduciary responsibility that they owed to that seller, which is just amazing to me. 6% would be it. So where's the rest? That argument just does not hold water at any level. It goes on to say here, it is long established in American law that local governments can seize delinquent property as long as due process requirements are met and compensation has never been required, the lawyers argued. Well, then, okay. Then let's address this long-standing breach of justice now. And let's be as ashamed of it as every other stupid law that we've allowed to exist longer than a day. This argument is, well, this is the status quo. This is the way it is. Well, okay. That's a status quo that deserves to be turned on its head. It is not only unethical and immoral, it is evil, and it needs to be stopped. And I get that these lawyers need to make the arguments they need to make. They need to stand in front of a court and they need to try to make the best arguments they can. But if this is it, if this is a true representation of the arguments that were brought to the table at the Supreme Court, if this isn't a 100% Supreme Court support for ending equity theft, I really want to read. I think it's going to pass. I think it's going to make it. But I want to read that dissenting opinion. I want to know why I want to know what justice is going to defend keeping the surplus from auction properties. That's what I want to see. Because I'd really want to know more about that justice and what their opinions are and how can they argue that this isn't a full-on violation of the Constitution and your individual rights as a property owner. Blows my mind. Just mind-boggling. So again, like so many of these where I love to get your opinion, but frequently don't get it. I really am going to encourage you to give me some feedback on this one. I would love to hear from you. This seems so patently obvious to me. I would love to hear an argument from somebody in support of the state being able to do this. I just don't see it. Now, of course, the goal here, as always, is to leave you with more value on the table than I've taken up in your time. I hope this discussion's done it. I hope we got you thinking in directions that maybe you weren't thinking you were going to be thinking today. As always, you can reach me at soldbyrobert.com. I've got some great tools. And I realize I've said this in a few things now, a couple of market analysis, and I think the last podcast. I have an amazing tool for my homeowners now. And I'm not going to say sellers because you don't need to be a seller for this to be an amazing tool for you. I'm calling this my homeowners tool. If you have decided you are going to stay in your home for the rest of your life, you're going to give it to your children and it'll be in your family for the next 10 generations. This tool is still something you should have a handle on. It is not just about understanding on a monthly basis or a yearly basis how much your home is worth. It's also understanding what you can do with your equity, all of your options. What are some cool things you could potentially accomplish without ever selling your home, but potentially leveraging off of the value that it has. It's a great tool. It's amazing. It is the best I have found. And for those of you who've been listening for a while, you know over the years, sometimes on a yearly basis, I've changed the tool I've been using for my clients because I've been trying to lean into more and more better and better features and more useful information for people. And this one, perfect so far. I've had it now for 3 or 4 weeks. I've been test driving it myself. A few select family members have been using it and they all give it rave reviews. A couple of choice clients from my past who have also said it is amazing. So now I'm ready to let everyone else get access to it. Head on over to soldbyrobert.com, right at the top of the page, front page, left side. Start by typing in your address. You're going to get that full estimated online value of your home. But then once you sign up, there is so much more. It just scratches the surface. So, and I'm also going to be doing a video on YouTube about it coming up. So if you're assuming I'm trying to trick you, you can wait for that video where I'll show you what you get and all that other kind of wonderful stuff. But for right now, do it. Jump in. I promise I will not pester you. This will just be a great tool for you as a homeowner to keep up with what's going on with your home. And you're welcome. It costs me money to provide this, but I've got lots of seats I can keep open. I've got over 500 seats available to me before it costs me more. I'm literally right now at a handful. And when I'm finished rolling it out to all my current subscribers to similar tools I've been providing, when I migrate those people over, it'll be about close to 200 folks migrated over. But I got room. There's room in the bus for everybody right now. So feel free to head on over and check it out. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. And I'll talk to y'all next time.